Good morning. Welcome to the Trent England Show. Glad to have you watching this Thursday morning. It is cutoff day in the Oklahoma legislature. No, I'm sorry. That does not mean that all the legislators today wear their Daisy Dukes. It means that if bills have not made it through committee, they are DEAD, they are dead. So that is the importance of today in the legislature. I mean, the great thing is, you know, except for when the bills that you want to pass die, the great thing is it's the winnowing, right? And so you start off the legislative session with all of these bills out there. And frankly, a lot of them aren't serious. I'll tell you a secret. Oftentimes, legislators introduce pieces of legislation with no intention of actually seeing them pass, no intention of seeing them move forward, but they want to be able to tell somebody somewhere, hey, I tried. I did what I could. I introduced it. So it's a great winnowing moment here toward the near the beginning of the legislative session, the first day of March. And I'm going to talk about some bills today that don't need to meet the committee deadline because it's already happened. Some of them moved forward last year, but they haven't got across the finish line yet. And I'm going to run through a few of these so that you know what's going on, what serious business is going on in your Oklahoma legislature. But let's start off with a little bit of news from around the rest of the world. It may be impossible to dissent against Chinese government policy down at the Confucius Institute in Norman, Oklahoma, at the University of Oklahoma. It may be impossible to dissent in places like that, but actually in China, I mentioned the other day that that they are working on, as they always do. You know, you have socialism. It verges toward totalitarianism, and you have to have a dear leader, right? I mean, if you believe that the state is your savior, it only makes sense to personify the state in the rule of one person, and they have that with President Xi Jinping in China, and they are removing the term limits so that he can serve more than 10 years as the president of China. And there's actually some blowback in China, some dissent. The Associated Press had that dispatch yesterday, and I just wanted to point that out. Actually, some dissent in China over that decision, but again, you know, you probably can't get away with the dissent down in Norman, Oklahoma, because they take money from the Chinese government. Frankly, of course, the dissenters in China may wind up disappearing over the next few days. Who knows? Meanwhile, down in California, this is just the craziest story. Maybe you've seen this already. The mayor of Oakland actually tipped off some folks in Oakland who are it's hard even to say this. This is such a bizarre story. So ICE was going to do an immigration raid, and you know, we talked about it here on the program, right? I mean, for all of the claims made on the left, most of these immigration raids focus on people who have committed crimes that aren't immigration crimes. They focus on people who've committed crimes like burglary, larceny, assault, robbery, drug dealing. Right? I mean, these are not. It's not just about people who are in the country illegally. The majority of the people who wind up getting arrested have committed other crimes. And the mayor of Oakland, before one of these raids, tipped off some people, and they're saying that 800 criminal aliens evaded capture because of the actions of the mayor of Oakland. It's a great measure of California politics, because in California she's going to be lionized. She's going to be made to be a hero in California because she's helping people who have violated the law, and in many cases have violated many laws, to stay out on the streets committing more crimes. I mean, this is, and again, she's going to be lionized. She's going to be considered a hero in the state of California. This is probably a way for her, a stepping stone for her to win higher office in the state of California. Okay. Meanwhile, Washington, D.C., I just wanted to mention this. Maybe I shouldn't. This is probably going to get me in trouble. But my former colleagues at the Heritage Foundation are saying that that Donald Trump has accomplished 64% of his agenda so far. They're saying it's more than Ronald Reagan at this point in Reagan's presidency, which, you know, it's a great headline. It's great to celebrate the accomplishments of the new administration. We do that here on the Trent England Show, but we call it like we see it, and we talk about the good and the bad. And I will just say this: I am just shocked. I mean, the Trump administration has done a lot of wonderful things. Tax reform, obviously, is one of those. But it remains amazing to me that the motivating issues for Trump's core supporters are frankly the areas where he hasn't delivered, or he's delivered the least. I mean, especially when it comes to building a big wall that Mexico is going to pay for. And it's just funny to me that nobody talks about that anymore. It seems like the biggest things that were promised on the campaign trail are almost forgotten by people who want to put on their rose-colored glasses. And look, we call it like we see it on the Trent England Show. A lot of wonderful things have happened. We talked with Grover Norquist on the program yesterday about tax reform and the huge dividends, some of them literal dividends, being paid as a result of tax reform. And I think all of that is going to provide political dividends to President Trump himself and people connected with the administration. But it is fascinating to me how certain things get selectively forgotten. Okay, so I've said my piece on that. Schools and school safety, you can pop that headline up there. This is from Northeastern University. I just wanted to point this out. This is actual research rather than inflammatory headlines over at CNN or somewhere like that. Schools are safer than they used to be, despite the fact that there are violent incidents that happen in schools, despite the fact that there are sometimes horrific school shootings. Schools are actually safer than they used to be. I mean, context, right? Context, all of the, and all of these things going on, you've seen them, and I'm not going to, you know, the wall-to-wall media coverage around the gun debate I don't know. I tune it out a little bit because you hear people say the same thing over and over and over again. But I will say this. I mean, you see these companies, Dick's Sporting Goods, and I think Walmart stores now, and Fred Meyer stores, and all of these companies stepping up to say that they're going to restrict the sale of certain kinds of weapons or weapons to people who are 18 years old. I'll say I bought my first firearm when I was 18 years old. So these things do kind of perk my ears up a little bit. But look, just to put all this in context, especially with Dick's Sporting Goods, it is so absurd that these companies get any credit for any of this, because they're doing two things, one of which has already been pointed out, right? When Dick's Sporting Goods says that they're not going to sell AR-15s, they're actually pulling a weapon from their shelves that is used in a tiny percentage of murders and other violent crimes in the United States. And you know what they're going to replace it with? They're going to make more space to sell handguns. Handguns are used in far more crimes, far more shootings, far more murders and other deaths in the United States than are AR-15s. Dick's Sporting Goods' decision is actually going to allow them to sell more weapons that are used in more crimes. That's already been pointed out. The other thing I'll point out is, frankly, a lot of these companies, what they really want to do is make it less likely that they get sued in the future. They know that their decisions aren't going to make it actually harder for people to get weapons. They're just going to make it less likely, slightly less likely perhaps, that people get weapons at their stores. And their attorneys have probably told them, I'm just speaking as an attorney, right? Their attorneys have probably told them that, hey, do what you can to avoid potential legal liability in the future. They are, it's called CYA, right? They are protecting their own and trying to get a little bit of political good feelings along the way from people who don't know any better. But obviously, if you watch this show, you know better. We all know better than to get on that bandwagon. So, okay. Two more stories, then we're going to get to. I'm just chuckling because I like the next one. Then we're going to get to legislation here in Oklahoma. Barack Obama, former President Obama, was giving a secret speech. And Reason, I've got to give a shout out to Reason, Reason.com, Reason Magazine, Reason Foundation. They had one of their reporters actually got into the speech, recorded the speech, they released the speech, And frankly, it was a pretty boring speech. They've got an article. I'll throw it up in the show links. We always do that after the show wraps up for the morning. I'll throw up the Reason piece that goes through what Barack Obama said. I mean, there's some interesting things, nothing surprising. But I was a little bit surprised because the folks at Reason acted surprised that the speech was secret because it was all so boring. And I just want to make the point, Barack Obama understands economics, at least when it comes to his own personal bottom line. If you sell your speeches, if you sell yourself as a speech maker, you need scarcity. This is like maybe economics 102, right? You need scarcity. I don't know, maybe it's 101. I don't want to give former President Obama too much credit here, right? But if you give your speeches and you allow anybody to record them and anybody to broadcast them and you allow them to get out there, especially if your speeches aren't that great, especially if they're kind of boring, that means that you need the scarcity even more. So it's no surprise, it's actually basic economics that former President Obama is trying to keep his speeches carefully guarded state secrets because that's how he makes money now. He actually understands basic economics, and so we'll give him credit where credit is due. That's what we say about the program. Okay, one more story, and then we're going to hit some bills in the Oklahoma State Legislature. A new treatment being developed up in Cleveland at the Cleveland Clinic Cleveland Clinic Learner Research Institute. I assume that learner is actually, I think, a name here, and not not describing people who learn. New research on Alzheimer's disease, researching in mice at this point, actually rolling back the effect of Alzheimer's disease. Really exciting, as someone who has had a relative, actually a couple of relatives die of Alzheimer's disease or similar conditions. I see things like this and I get really excited, and I just want to make this one point with this story, and I think you should make this point with stories like this whenever you see them. This is not happening in North Korea. This is not happening in Cuba or Venezuela. It's not even happening in China, and it's not happening in Russia. And although, I mean, there is some serious research that happens in the United Kingdom, this is not happening in the United Kingdom either. This is a point we make on the show. I try to make this point every time we talk about healthcare, because you've got these Bernie bros out there who are dangerous. They're more dangerous in this regard than I think in any other, right? When research doesn't happen, nobody knows. When discoveries don't happen, nobody knows, right? When innovations aren't developed, nobody knows about that, right? It is the ultimate unseen. When cancer isn't cured, we don't know about it, right? When the status quo remains because we've made bad policy choices that stifle innovation, that reduce the incentives for people to create new cures for diseases, right? Nobody knows that nobody sits around saying, well, another 1,000 people died from Alzheimer's complications today, but it wouldn't have happened if we would have had more incentives for people to innovate, right? Nobody says that. Nobody knows that. It's impossible to see. But we can see that in the United States, despite the fact that we have all kinds of government intervention, and we have had since the 1960s in healthcare in the United States, despite all of those failures, we still have a more competitive marketplace, we still have more innovation, and the rest of the world, the Swedens and the Cubas and even the North Koreas, free ride off of the innovation that happens here, because we don't, we're not like Barack Obama. We don't make it a big state secret. We don't keep it from leaking out. We actually let the rest of the world benefit from our innovation. We let the rest of the world benefit from the wonderful things that happen here because we have competition. And so, hey, that's a good thing. This is good news. This is particularly good news for, this is good news for everybody all around the world, right? If we develop a cure for Alzheimer's disease in Cleveland, in Ohio, in the United States, that'll benefit people in North Korea eventually. Think about that. Okay, I've said my piece on that. That really, I mean, every time you see a story about innovation in the United States, we should be trumpeting that on social media, and we should be reminding all of the people around us about the fact that the whole world benefits from what we create right here, the spillover effects of free markets, the spillover effects of property rights, and all the rest of it. Okay, legislative session Oklahoma, I told you it's cutoffs day. Again, if you didn't see the very beginning of the show, that does not mean that legislators go around in their Daisy Dukes with their pockets sticking out. That would be kind of fun for cutoff day, but it just means that the committees, if the bills haven't passed the committee, yeah, my production staff are laughing over here. This means that if bills haven't passed committees by today, they are cut off, they're dead. But some bills didn't even need to get through committee because they moved ahead in the last session. They just need to be, they passed the House, they passed the Senate, but in different forms. They need to be reconciled by conference committees. They need to be sent to the governor. What do we have in that regard here? I've got a list. Okay. We have Senate Bill 649, reducing the amount of extra prison time. So one of the things that we do when we sentence people is, if they're repeat offenders, we sentence them for longer periods of time. That makes sense, but it only makes sense up to a point, right? If you have somebody who's repeatedly committing nonviolent crimes, repeatedly committing crimes of stupidity or crimes of addiction, warehousing those people in prison for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years is crazy, is wasteful, is absurd. Senate Bill 649 would basically put some limits on those kind of extensions to a person's sentence for being a repeat offender. Again, you know, and if you're watching me and you're saying, oh, I don't know, this makes me kind of nervous. The ACLU sometimes supports things like this. Watch yesterday's show. Grab yesterday's show. I talked about why just because groups like the ACLU I mean, totally don't get it when it comes to criminal justice reform on the level of principles, that we should be willing to work with them when they accidentally support good policies, you know, probably including some of the things I'm going to talk about here today. Senate Bill 650 allows people who have not committed another crime to expunge their records more quickly. Right now it takes 15 years. If you committed a nonviolent crime, it still takes 15 years for a person to, you know, they get out of prison and they commit no further crimes and they want to wipe their record clean. It takes 15 years right now. This would drop it to 7. For violent offenders, it would be 10 years. Helps people get another job, helps people rent an apartment. I mean, these are people who have not committed another crime for a long period of time, and we should make it easier to turn tax consumers, that would be people in jail and prison, to turn tax consumers into taxpayers, right? That should be our objective, one of the objectives of criminal justice reform. More people paying taxes, less people using taxes. That's what Senate Bill 650 is about. I'll put this list up in the show links as well. We will put up some version of this. Okay, Senate Bill 689, this one I think is really, really important, because the more I've dug into this area of fines and fees and penalties and interest, the more it is, I mean, it's like through the looking glass in Alice in Wonderland, the crazy things that we do in Oklahoma. I mean, it's like one of those old movies of prisoners of war where you've got some prison guard, you know, beating somebody with a club and telling them to stand up, right? This is what we do to people in our criminal justice system with fines and fees and court costs and interest. We take people who have no money, right, who have no ability to pay, who have very poor prospects for getting another job, at least at the moment, right, when they're going through the criminal justice system, and we say, oh, and by the way, we have this user pays criminal justice system where we're going to charge you all the costs of it, and when you can't pay, we're going to charge you penalties, and we're going to charge you interest, and we're going to make sure that you are in debt and bankrupt for the rest of your life. Look, the problem is the politics of this sound great, right? Because legislators get to say, well, you know, we should make the people who use the criminal justice pay the cost of the criminal justice system, right? That sounds good, except it's stupid. Sorry, I used the S word, but it's stupid. I mean, we should not fall for this. Politicians should not try to peddle this to us, because it doesn't actually work, because if somebody can't pay, we don't get that money, right? It's kind of common sense, but it helps to think it through. If we charge somebody court costs and we put fines and fees and then we start charging them penalties and interest, if they can't pay, the money to pay for the criminal justice system has to come from somewhere else. So it comes from taxpayers anyway. So we still pay as taxpayers for the criminal justice system, but we get a criminal justice system that works worse. We get a criminal justice system where we tell people, why can't you reintegrate into society? Why can't you go out and get a job? Here's another fine, here's another fee, here's another penalty, here's a bench warrant for your arrest because you're not paying your fines and fees and penalties and court costs. It's crazy. It's mindless. It makes some political sense. It makes no policy sense. And Senate Bill 689 would give judges some latitude, some wiggle room to waive fees and fines and court costs if an offender is in a treatment program or a supervision program. It would make it a little bit easier for judges to do the right thing in some of these cases. I have a big long list of bills here, but I'm going to put this in the show link, in the show links when this show goes into archive mode later on today. I'll let you go through all these things. I know that tomorrow, Jonathan Small's, his Free Market Friday column in the Journal-Record newspaper, if you read that, that one's not behind a paywall, by the way, so you can read that every week. I know he's going to be writing about why this is so important to future state budgets. If we don't want to bust future state budgets, we need to do some of these things today, like the 3 bills I just identified. Thanks to particularly to Senator Greg Treat, who's the sponsor of a number of these measures, who's really helped to push these forward. You should let your legislators know that they have permission from you, your House member, your state senator, to work on criminal justice reform, to make sure that we are not just, that we're actually allowing people who want to get back to being productive members of our society, that we open those doors, we don't close those doors, we let people stand up, we don't kneecap them with absurd policies in our criminal justice system. Give your state senator, give your state House member, give them permission to work on these issues because it is so important. I'm going to leave it there for the Trent England Show. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe on iTunes if you want to get the podcast every day, and share the show on Facebook. You can subscribe on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching the Trent England Show. We'll be back tomorrow.